Hello everyone, welcome back to the Jayda InStitches show, and welcome to our Victorian parlor. We have entered the sweltering hot month of July, which means it's not only time for the next installment in our 2018 calendar blanket, the Victorian Stitch Sampler, it also means it's the perfect month to learn the Old Country Bridges stitch. This lovely stitch is open and airy and lacy and breezy. It looks fancy, but it's deceptively simple. It's a 1-2 repeater pattern, and once you've got this stitch into your head, you will be zipping along in no time. You can work this pattern on its own using a foundation chain row that's any multiple of 6, but you'll be starting in the 12th chain from the hook, so just keep that in mind when you're planning out the width of your project. As always, the written stitch guide for this particular stitch pattern will be available for sale in our Etsy shop, and you'll find a link to our shop in the description box down below. So, let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, grab our blankets, head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch up the Old Country Bridges stitch together. Please visit our shop and purchase a pattern. It helps support our show, and we'll put a link to our shop in the description box down below. In order to add the July stitch to our calendar blanket, you're going to want to have approximately 100 grams of the same kind, fiber, size yarn that you're using for the rest of your blanket. I'm back to blue for this one. And you need a small amount of yarn for your divider stitch. I've been using a cream throughout. You're going to want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle. You might want a measuring tape. It's not necessary, but it's always good to have around. And the hook is the same hook as the previous stitches. It's a 5.5 millimeter, also known as an I or a 9 in the US, and it's also known as a size 5 in the UK. And once you've got all that together, including your blanket, we can get started. At the end of our June stitch, you should have finished on an odd row, which means you would have 15 of these open shell motifs and 14 of these little picot motifs. So you'd have 29 motifs in total, plus an end stitch on both ends of the row. So we're dealing with 29 motifs, 15 of them are the open shells, 14 of them are the little picots, and we've got a stitch on either end. We're now going to add our divider row, so grab your divider color, make yourself a slip knot, and we will attach it to the end of last month's stitch. We're going to join our yarn with a slip stitch in the top of the stitch at the very edge of the last row. Chain 3. This chain 3 is going to count as a double crochet for our divider row. Into the same stitch that we joined our yarn in, we're going to work another double crochet. All right. Across our last row of the June stitch, so into the top middle of every single motif, whether it's an open shell or a picot, we're going to work 4 double crochets. So if you're looking at a shell, an open shell, find the middle double crochet, find the middle stitch, and work 4 double crochets into it. So that's 4 double crochets into the top middle of the fan. You then move to the next motif, which is the open shell, or that I should say the little picot stitch. So that's 2 single crochets with a little picot in between. Into that open picot, you're going to work 4 double crochets. So you're going to work 4 double crochets in the middle of every open fan, and 4 double crochets into the middle of every picot, all the way across, and I'll catch up with you at the end. So you should have 4 double crochets in the middle of every motif all the way across, and by the time you get to the end, you're going to skip over to the last stitch of that last row and work 2 double crochet into the top of the last stitch. Count them up, you should have 120 double crochets, and if you're changing color like me, you can snip your yarn, fasten off, weave in that tail, and get ready to start the stitch. Take your stitch color now and make a slip knot. We're going to join our new color in the top of the last stitch of the previous row with a slip stitch. And we're going to chain 6 to begin. Now this chain 6 is going to count as a double crochet chain 3. We're going to count, including the stitch that we joined our yarn in, 6 stitches. So into that 6th stitch, you're going to work a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. So it should look something like this to begin with. So it's a good old-fashioned V-stitch there. Chain 3, skip the next 5 stitches, and into the 6th stitch, work another V-stitch, or double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Chain 3, skip 5, and into the 6th stitch, work a V, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Chain 3, and repeat, and this is all you need to do all the way across. Skip 5 stitches, into the next stitch, work a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 3, skip 5, repeat. And I'll see you at the end. When you get across to the end, work your last double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, or V-stitch, chain 3 into that next stitch, and then skip 5, and that should bring you to the top of the chain 3 that began the previous row, and you're just going to double crochet into the top of that chain 3. And if it helps to sort of spin the chain 3 around, maybe grab the top loop and then push your hook underneath. However you want to grab the top of that chain 3 is entirely up to you. It's okay. And that's the end of our beginning row. This is sort of the foundation row for the pattern. We're going to chain 5. So a chain 5 starts off every even row. Moving into row 2 now. And here is the pattern for row 2. Into that first chain 3 space, you're just going to single crochet, chain 2. Into the middle of the V-stitch from the previous row, you're going to work a V-stitch, or double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, and then we start all over. Chain 2, single crochet into the middle of that big chain 3 space, chain 2, find the next V-stitch, and work a V-stitch into the middle of it. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 2, single crochet into the big chain 3 space, chain 2, and V-stitch into the next V-stitch. So you're going to chain 2 in between V-stitches and single crochets all the way across. Your single crochets go into the middle of that chain 3 space, and you always V-stitch into the V-stitch of the previous row. It'll look something like this, kind of like a little bridge. Right? That's all you have to do all the way across for row 2 and every even row, and I'll catch up with you near the end. When you get all the way across to the end of row 2, or an even row, work your last V-stitch in the top of a V-stitch, chain 2, single crochet into that big chain space that you'll find on the end, chain 2 more, and then count up 1, 2, 3, or count 4 chains away from the V-stitch or up 3 chains from the end. You want the 3rd chain from the bottom, and you're just going to double crochet into that top of what would technically be the chain 3. But you want 4 chains away from the V-stitch or 3 chains up from the previous row. So grab that chain and double crochet into it. That's how a row 2 ends. Now, quick note on numbers. Every odd row should have 19 V-stitches in it and a post on either end, which will be a double crochet or a whole bunch of chains. And every row 2 or even row will have these little bridges. We'll have 19 of these little bridges. So basically you want 19 V-stitches in an odd row, easy to count, and then there should be a corresponding little bridge on top of that. So it's another odd, even row. Here we go into row 3, or every odd row. Odd row begins with a chain 6. Get our big blanket turned around here. And odd rows are super simple. Jump over to the first V-stitch and work a V-stitch into it. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Chain 3, jump over to the next V-stitch. So here's the V-stitch, jump over the bridge into the next V-stitch and work double crochet, chain 1, double crochet into it. So it's just V-stitches in the middle of the V-stitches from the previous row, and the V-stitches in the odd rows are separated by 3 chains every single time. Jump over to the next V and repeat. That's all you've got to do for row 3 and every odd row, and I'll see you at the end. At the end of row 3, or any odd row, you finish your last V-stitch, chain 3, and then you come across that little single crochet and a bunch of chains that began the last row. Find the third chain, or find the single crochet and skip a chain away from it. You want sort of the top of what would be the chain 3, and you're going to double crochet into it. So that's how every odd row ends. Every odd row should have 19 V-stitches in it and a bunch of chain 3 spaces in between. Looks like a bridge. I love this. Almost like Roman aqueducts. And every even row begins with 5. That chain 5 counts as a double crochet, chain 2. Turn our big blanket around now. And every even row works like this. Single crochet into that first chain 3 space, chain 2, V-stitch into the V-stitch of the previous row. That's a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 2, and start all over again. Single crochet in that big space, chain 2, V-stitch in the V-stitch, chain 2, single crochet in the big space, chain 2, and so on. End the row with a single crochet, so you do your last V-stitch, chain 2, single crochet in the big space, chain 2, and find the third chain up, double crochet in it, chain 6 to start your odd row, and then you just V-stitch in every V-stitch all the way across with 3 chains in between. That's an odd row. You just want to repeat your rows 2, 3, 2, 3, or even odd, all the way until you get to row 9, and I will catch up with you there. All right, I have completed 9 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Just count your V-stitches all the way up. 9 rows. At the end of the 9th row, I'm going to fasten off. So snip my yarn, and I will weave in my little tail. So I'm going to pick the back of it. And when you're trying to weave a tail into a really open, lacy bit of crochet, I just sort of pick up the back loops of the stitches, and you know, every so many, slide them underneath a few. Don't pull too tightly. Every once in a while sort of stop, and then I like to double back on myself. So here's where it comes out. I'm going to double back underneath those stitches. Again, not pulling very tightly. And then I'm just going to go underneath some of these loops here and I'll trim my excess. Altogether, 9 rows of our cute little bridge stitch here should measure approximately 100 centimeters wide, or 40 inches, and almost 5 inches in height, or 13 centimeters. So that's how big it'll be. Don't worry if yours isn't exactly like mine, that's perfectly okay. But that's roughly what 9 rows will get you. And I just love the look of this stitch. It is so neat. Look at all those little bridges. And there you have it, the 7th installment in the 2018 calendar blanket, the Victorian Stitch Sampler, the Old Country Bridges Stitch. I love this. Open, airy, easy to work, and nice and cool in this hot, hot weather. I hope you enjoyed working on this particular stitch along with me, and we will see you soon on the Jayda InStitches show. Till then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a wonderful week, everyone. Bye.